I never had any intention of getting into woodwork. I was into painting and drawing and so forth. And I've done that, for places across the country. My primary interest was always art. From probably the time I was 3 years old on, I was doing drawing, painting, that sort of thing. My mother was an artist. Her father was an artist. My father, sort of an artist, cabinet maker really, but he had an uncle, my great uncle, and he was an artist also with the Buffalo Art Society. And then my great grandfather was also a sculptor. He was a steeplejack in Germany, but he also did sculptural pieces and wood carving. I went through the Williamsville school system, graduated in '69 from Williamsville South High School. It was one of only 2 high schools at the time. And from there I went to Pratt Institute in New York City. The large proportion of the student body that came in when I did were from around the New York area. A lot of them had gone to New York Art and Design and other art-oriented types of schools. And so I was a little bit behind in that sort of thing, and probably a little bit intimidated by some of the other students who had that experience. I think there was only going to be a quarter of our entering students left. They weeded them out very quickly. It was a pretty heavy load of work, and if you didn't keep up, you were gone. And sure enough, by the time May came around of '70, a lot of students were gone. The big advantage of going to a school in New York City was the accessibility to all the museums, galleries of various kinds, just the city architecture itself, and the environment. There was a lot of people around that were doing various types of work that you would never see in Buffalo. My father knew Reverend Kreider long before this building was built. He had worked, he had done some other work for him. I think I had mentioned before about doing his wedding furniture when he married Sally Kreider, Sally Larkin. And I'm sure over the years he probably mentioned, oh yeah, I got a kid who's kind of good with drawing and in the sort of going in an artistic direction. And I also helped out occasionally with my father on some of the installation work here, even a minor bit of construction on 1 or 2 pieces. So Reverend Kreider knew I was around, and he knew I went to art school. And after I got out of art school, he came down and said, would you be interested in designing some sculptural pieces for the narthex wall which is at the far end of the church from the altar. Your father will probably be carving it because he had already done some carving work for the reredos behind the altar and so forth. Well, I was, happy to do that sort of work, kind of fit into what I had intended, after I got out of school. He gave me, I think it was 4 passages from the Old Testament, and it was all generally based on the tree of life. And I went to work sketching up things that I thought were appropriate. I did a little bit of research, about these passages, and Reverend Kreider and I went back and forth a few times until we came up with something that we thought was appropriate. And then the funny thing is, my father looked at the design and said, I really don't do that kind of carving. He was, a cabinet maker. He would do furniture carving, like for Chippendale and Queen Anne and that sort of thing. But when it came to things with faces or naturalistic figures, that was a little bit out of his domain. So he said, well, you're going to do it. As soon as my father saw that I had a tiny bit of interest in doing this sort of work, he loaded me up with chisels and mallets and clamps and wood and so forth, and kind of let me loose. Well, for me, doing things that were fairly naturalistic, well, that was, just an extension of drawing. And I also had some three-dimensional design work at school. So it kind of fit in, learning about working with the grain of the wood. He gave me some pointers, but it wasn't all that difficult. It's not until you get into figured lumber that the grain becomes a real issue. The larger the piece, probably the softer the wood you want. One, because it's more accessible, or more available. If you're working on small pieces, you want a harder grained wood. You still like to have a straight grain, but that allows you to do finer detail. The tools that he gave me, some of them dated from the late 1800s, and none of them were any newer than, I would say at that time, 40 or 50 years old. He said, one of the most important things you need are sharpening stones. We used oil stones back then, and you had to have stones that would fit all the various curvatures of the gouges and parting tools and things of that nature. Reverend Kreider came down and he had a passage, and he said, we'd like to have something that will complement the organ pipes behind the choir stall, would be on the south side of the church. And they also had stalls on the north side, but the wall was blank and he wanted something there. And he gave me a passage that dealt with David as a musician, and he played a kinnor, which I've never been able to find that word anywhere else, but Ed Kreider knew it. He had a very wide vocabulary. And of course, David was a shepherd, and I went to work designing this piece, and outside of the passage that he had given me, that was the only input I had from Reverend Kreuter. And the thing with that particular piece, it's quite three-dimensional. The previous carvings I did were relief carvings. They were at the most 2 inches thick. But this was, I don't know, maybe up to 15, 16 inches thick in parts. And, obviously you don't go to a lumber yard and say, I want a block of wood that's 7 feet wide and 4 feet tall and 16 inches thick. It doesn't come that way. Decided to use the same type of wood that was used in the Reredos, because it was going to be down in that portion of the building, and that meant part of it was going to be in butternut, or white walnut as it's sometimes called, which carves nicely. It's a softer wood. And then the rest was going to be in, you can call it basswood or linden or tulip wood. It comes various names. And it's a faster growing wood, grows extremely straight grained, not many imperfections in it, and you can get chunkier pieces of wood. And the main part of the sculpture, which is obviously the figure of David and the lamb and the ram, is somewhere 120 to 140 pieces of wood, all laminated together. So we got the bulk that was required. It's easy to make a mistake. It's difficult to make a repair. So what I did was I made a full-size model of that, and I used some styrofoam, and then I coated it with plastiline clay, and I basically created the 3 figures all in that media. So I had something I could measure against and have a good idea of, the direction that I was going to be carving the various parts, and it worked. And I was always lucky when things would start to look like they were getting slow, the phone would ring. And Buffalo's a fairly small town. Word of mouth, gets around, and it's always led from one job to another, to another, to another. Well, woodwork covers a lot of disciplines. The sort of thing that you see here with the carving and so forth, probably difficult to find somebody to teach that. I know there are some wood carving clubs, and that would be one place to start. At some schools they have, like at Buff State, they have something called wood design. I taught it one semester. And RIT, I think they have something similar. So some schools have, that sort of, they might call it industrial design, that maybe you would pick up some, some information, on how to do certain things. If you really are interested in doing it, it's doable. Every now and then somebody wants, something made out of wood.